Happy Sunday and welcome back to another sewing tutorial. I'm Leah, I'm the person behind Sewing on Sunday. I've studied fashion design, pattern making and worked as a seamstress for 3 years. Today I'm going to show you how you can make the Sara dress, and for that I got a beautiful linen fabric. And you will also need some bias tape, a little bit of elastic and the pattern. I've printed the pattern already. I will link the pattern also in the description down below. And when you print it, just make sure it's printed on 100%, so just measure the 55 box. I have cut the pattern out already, and for that I took the size chart to get the sizing right. And if you want some more instructions on how to tape it together, you can go to an older video, for example the Lala top or the Ella shorts. There's also many pieces on fold. I have folded both sides of the fabric in, and I'm just checking that it is all along the same width that's folded in. And the two other pieces, the back and the sleeve, I will cut off these pieces. Seam allowance is already in there, and with the dart I just do a little bit more into a tip so I have enough fabric for it to lie flat. Now we have 4 times the back piece and 1 time the lining, 2 layers of the sleeve, the back on fold 1 time and the front on fold 1 time. Before taking off the patterns, we have to mark on the sleeve what's the front. For that I'm just using a light coloring pencil because that washes out really easily, and I'm just wetting the tip a little bit, and I can make a little mark to remember. Now we also have to trace the darts, and you can also do that with the coloring pencil, but if you have tracing paper, then this is a really cool and practical way to do it. But then make sure I'm not going to move it otherwise, so it's exactly on the same spot again. And I'm just tracing it with the wheel. And it's important that this one is round and not straight, because our bodies are round and not straight. That's why darts shouldn't be straight. Now I'm also tracing it on the front piece. We can pin the darts, and when pinning the darts, you want to start on the side and you just check that the marking lines up exactly. And then put the pin in. You'll just continue until you're in the tip. And now you can pin all the darts. There should be 4. Now when sewing darts, you always want to start on this side to be able to end up just at the last millimeter here. And that is very important, so you don't have these bubbles at the end. Here again I'm just having stitch length 2.5. As always, when I have normal seams that will be on the inside. At the very last string that's attached, and you can either do a few back stitches, but if you're not sure it's going to be perfect, you can also just cut them long and then do it by hand, which ensures that it's going to be super nice. As you can see, my last stitch is here. And now I'm doing all of the darts, just like that. The next step is ironing the darts, and it's very important not to skip the ironing steps. So this piece is the lining, and in the lining we're going to iron the darts downwards. And just like that you have the perfect darts. Now ironing the front piece, we're going to iron the darts upwards. When I first started learning in the atelier, I didn't get it why we had to iron the darts upward. I was always thinking downward would be better or more intuitive, but when you are looking from the outside, you have like a nice piece that goes without any interruption. Unless you're a child, you're not going to look up so much on somebody's piece of clothing. So that's why we are ironing them, that you don't look into the seams. And also that you're not collecting dust here. Otherwise it's just kind of like a little bag to collect dust. With the side seams, it's the same actually. So when you have the front piece and you're looking from the front, you would iron the seams direction front, which I found very unintuitive in the beginning. But when you look at someone from the front, it looks seamless. Whereas if you iron it to the other side, with the back piece obviously now, you look into the seam from the front. And when I see that now, I just can't unsee it. I don't think it looks nice. So that's why side seams, if we are overlocking or zigzagging them together, we generally iron them to the front and darts upwards. But so that it won't be too chunky, we are ironing the darts in the lining exactly the opposite. So when you put it together, actually these two pieces, it evens it out. It's super flat then, which makes it perfect. Next, the lining can be pinned to the back piece and the second back piece to the other side. The same thing with the front piece. And when pinning this, it's important that we pin the nice side of the fabric to the nice side of the fabric. With this fabric, both sides are the same, but it's just important that the finished seam is on the inside when pinning it. Here, I always check that the armhole is facing towards the armhole here. Now we have the two pieces and the back piece is pinned on like this. The armhole is facing upwards. The darts are the finished side on the inside. Then we can sew with 1 centimeter seam allowance on all of them. And in the beginning and at the end, always a few back and forth stitches. Now I am sewing exactly over the pins, which might arguably be not the best thing to do, but it usually is not a problem if you go slow when crossing. Then the needle can divert and doesn't go straight into the pin, but when you go too fast, it is very possible to just break the sewing machine needle. I do it because I feel like it helps me keep the fabric in place exactly where I want it, and of course I could just take it out now before going over, which would probably be the best thing, but I have found it doesn't really matter, or it's okay to sew over it, and I've been doing it for years or so when I was working in the atelier. So just be careful if you want to do it too, otherwise just take them out just before you are at the position like this, which kind of works perfect as well. Because you made a little triangle with the dart, it aligns perfectly with the seam allowance. Now in the main piece, when attaching the sides, it's important to stop 1 centimeter above the edge. Right here. Now I have the back part of the dress, and this is the top. It's very important. It's quite similar in shape, so make sure you have the right part, otherwise check with the pattern quickly. So I'm now ironing down 5 millimeters. I measured with my tape, and if you don't have the overlock, it doesn't matter, you can just iron down the 5mm. You can also do a zigzag stitch on the edge first, but nothing is going to show anywhere. It's just to ensure that it's not going to open up in the washing. Now I'm ironing down 2 centimeters for the back. Now I have ironed down the 5mm and the 2 centimeters, and the next step is going to sew along exactly here on the edge, and that I'm doing with a slightly longer stitch, about 3.5 stitch length. I'm following along the edge with stitch length 3.5. I do a few back and forth stitches in the seam allowance, and then with the inside of the foot I'm just going to follow the edge. So it looks like this and like this in the back. The next step is adding the elastic to the back. This is going to scrunch it a little bit so it fits around the back of your waist. With this, I have a recommendation for each size in the size chart. You can also just play around a little bit and see what looks best for you. I wouldn't do it too short. You can always do it longer, but yeah. I also want it to be too snatched in. I want it to hang down a little bit so that you have a little bit of open back. Now I'm just using a safety pin and pushing it in. Now, before pulling it all the way through, I'm going to stop when I have the elastic just here, and I will now go to the sewing machine and do a few stitches back and forth to have it here secure before I pull it through. So now the elastic's just here on the edge, and I'm placing it in the middle, and I just do a few back and forth stitches so that it is secure. And now I can push it to the other side. Now careful so you don't lose it. And importantly, just check that it's not twisted, and then you can do a few back and forth stitches on the side as well. Now we have our back piece ready. Now I'm overlocking the sides of the lining. If you don't have an overlock, it doesn't matter, you can just zigzag the edge. It's not going to show anywhere. And now I'm just ironing it to the back. You don't even have to zigzag, but I do recommend to do it just to make sure it's not going to fray in the washing and your dress just keeps nice over time. Here as well, I'm ironing it to the back. Now I'm pinning on the back piece, and I just pin it all along both edges. Here important that this side is facing upwards, this side is facing the nice side of the front piece where the seams have a nice finish, and I'll just pin it. Now I'm adding the back piece, and I'm doing that with 1 centimeter seam allowance again. I'm going to pull this flat a little bit to start, and then I just sew all the way down. Same thing on the other side. In the main piece, I'm now ironing the seam at the top apart, just like that for now, and on the other side as well. I start overlocking at the bottom, and I'm doing so from the back. If you don't have an overlock, you can just zigzag the edge. Now here I'm checking that it lies flat and the seam is apart, and I'll just continue to the top. like this. And for the other part, and I'm also lying it flat and overlocking this side like this. And here it's all the way down to the bottom seam. Same thing for the other side. I'm starting from the back, and here I will start at the top, and I'm just checking that this is really nicely apart. And here again, I'm folding it apart and overlocking this side. Once more, you can easily zigzag the whole thing, especially here. Nothing is gonna show in the end. For the overlock endings, I'm just gonna leave it long. Now I am preparing the front piece, and for that I'm going to overlock just this part. I will start here, which is at the side seam, and I'm just overlocking the bottom part. If you don't have an overlock, that's no problem, you can just zigzag the edge, but you won't see this edge in the end. It's going to be hidden and sewn down again. So just like this. Now the side seam can be ironed to the front. And for the lower part, I'm also going to iron the seam to the front. And for that, I'm always pulling at the back and pulling the iron as well, a little bit. And then I'll just double check, and I'm pushing it slightly back from this side. Now I have the main piece, and I'm placing it flat, and I have the lining. Here the nice side of the fabric with the darts finished is facing upwards, and then I take the lining and with the darts facing downwards, which means the seam allowance is facing me, I'm going to pin the neckline together. Then I'm also matching up the seam allowance here, and I push them together with the seam allowance of the lining. We have ironed that to the back, and with the main piece we've ironed it to the front, so it lines up perfectly. And very important, here I'm going to leave open, but I'll now pin the back together, and I'm also putting a pin in, and then we will sew along with 1 centimeter seam allowance in the neckline and 1 centimeter seam allowance all around here, back until exactly the end of this seam, just here, and same thing on the other side. Now I'm finished sewing this piece and the neckline, and as well the other side. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut back the seam allowance here at the tip a little bit, otherwise it's going to be too cramped when turning it inside out. Same thing on the other side. Now we have it like this, And what I'm going to do on both sides, I'm going to zigzag this edge with the sewing machine. The reason I'm zigzagging it and not overlocking is because with the overlock it gets a bit chunky here at the tip, and I can't have that with it. It's also going to be fully inside, so no one's gonna see. And I do recommend to zigzag it because I don't want it to fray when I'm washing it a lot. I will overlock the seam for the neckline, but here in the middle I'm making a little notch so that it will turn more easily. Now I'm making a little knot into the overlock thread and cut it off. Here I have another one. Since this will be well hidden, that's fine. I will just make a knot and cut it off. Now I'm turning it like this, and back piece. Here it's a bit difficult to get it out, but I'm using a pen. Just make sure you don't have the tip out, and carefully, don't go too aggressively, you don't want to make a hole. Also, don't do it with the scissors. And the other as well. The next step is now to iron it. Here it's important to check and massage the seam out if necessary. Now for the neckline, I am ironing the seam allowance towards the lining, and now on my sewing machine I will sew along the edge on the side of the lining, and that's going to make sure that it will stay in exactly the right place. Now I'm sewing on the side of the lining, and the seam allowance is ironed this side as well, so I'm sewing down the seam allowance. For that I'm also going to choose a longer stitch length, about 3.5. It's not going to be visible from the outside, but it's like a decorative stitch and a useful stitch. From the inside, still visible. I'm also now pulling the fabric a little bit apart, just a tiny bit, so that I know it's super flat. So just like this, and then we can iron it flat again. Now I'm ironing the neckline flat after sewing the seam allowance down on the back side, so it looks like this. Very pretty. Now I have the lower part of the lining, and I'm gonna turn it this way, and I will iron up exactly 1 centimeter for the whole length. And at the start and the beginning it should be placed right already because of the seams. Now the lining should look like this, so we're gonna hem it with a stitch along here. I am choosing again 3.5 stitch length, like a bit of a longer stitch. And it looks like this. Now this is totally optional, but I have super cute labels, so I'm going to place one here because I know it's not going to show with the knot, and I think it's a cute placement. And for that I'm just checking that I only have one layer. I took a little bit too much, and then I'll sew it in only on one layer because it's going to be flat. I guess you could do that earlier, but yeah, it doesn't really matter. Cute. Now it's time for the sleeves, and with the sleeves we've marked the front on both of them. And what I'm doing now is I'll just place the side seams on top of each other and I pin down, same on the other side. So the marking is showing outward. Same thing, the marking I have here, and I'm pinning down the side. Now I will sew along the edge with 1 centimeter seam allowance on both of them. Now I sew the inline together with 1 centimeter seam allowance, stitch length 2.5. With the stitch length, you basically want the seams that should hold something together. You want a shorter stitch length, but when you're sewing on top of something, especially when it's visible, you should choose a longer stitch for a cleaner appearance. Now with both of these I'm also overlocking, but you can definitely zigzag the edge as well, and I'm going to do that from the back, so not where I've marked the front, from the other side. I'm ironing the seam allowance towards the front, that's where we've marked the sleeve, and that I do for both of them. And I can also quickly turn it around to check if it's super flat. Pull a little bit. Now I have the main piece and the sleeves, and I'm placing them here. So here I have the marking to the front. I turned it the right side out, and I'm pinning the seam allowance just here, matched up. Now I have pinned the sleeve onto the main piece, and I'll just sew along here with 1 centimeter seam allowance. The same thing for the other sleeve. Now again 1 centimeter seam allowance, stitch length 2.5, and I'm just starting where the main piece starts. Now for both the sleeves I will overlock them all around. You can also do a zigzag stitch just to ensure that this is not going to fray, and I am going right over this, just along the edge. The next thing you want to do is knot the overlock threads, and then you can sew along with a long stitch 1 centimeter just where the front piece starts until the back piece starts, just with 1 centimeter seam allowance, and then again with 2 centimeter seam allowance. This on both sides of the sleeves. Now I'm choosing a longer stitch to do so, because I want to pull on them later to ruffle the sleeves. So I'm also leaving the threads long, and I don't do back and forth stitches. Here again I'm gonna leave them long, and now I'll just do a second round with 2 centimeters seam allowance. The same thing for the other sleeve. Now I'm cutting the bias tape to the right length. It's noted in the size chart how long it needs to be. To finish off the ending, I'm I'm folding it open and 1 centimeter to the inside. This I'm doing on both sides and for both bias tapes, and I'm just ironing it flat. If you haven't been doing this 100,000 times before, maybe just take measuring tape to get it right. Now on the sleeve there are the 2 threads, and we can just carefully pull on them. And I'm just doing it from both sides. So. To get the sleeves ruffled. Now you can line up the bias tape exactly on the seam here and pin it down, and same thing on the other side, lining it up. Important that it's folded in and then open to the seam allowance. Now you can line up the length and then pin it all along. This you can do for both of the sleeves, and then we will start sewing it down with 1 centimeter seam allowance, which should be about in the crease. Now with stitch length 2.5, I am sewing down the bias tape, also with seam allowance 1 centimeter. Now I'm folding it open and down the other side. For that I'm just closing it like this, then I'm folding it down the other side and pinning it. Now I'm sewing it down with 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, and I'm just starting at the height where the front piece and the back piece starts. Here stitch length 3.5 again, because it's a visible stitch. While doing this, I am also adjusting the ruffles a little bit. Now the tunnel should be sewn down just like this. Here you now can take out the threads you used to adjust the ruffles. You can just pull them out. I'm using the back of a pin, and because it's quite a big stitch, it is very easy to do. Now the same thing for the other sleeve. Now you can zigzag or overlock the end of the sleeve. I'm doing this from the outside, just careful that you're not gonna catch any fabric underneath. This I'm of course doing on both sides, always checking that the seam allowance lies flat and into the right direction, just like this. And what I'm also doing is I'm overlocking the bottom of the skirt. If you want to try it on and check if the length is right, you can definitely do that before, but you can also leave it a little bit longer, so you can in the future like let it down a little bit if you want to. That's what I'm usually doing. Now to finish off the sleeves and the bottom seam, you should definitely try it on and decide what length you have, and then you just iron up about a centimeter. I decided I'm going to iron up 5 centimeters here, and that I'm doing all around. Is it too much maybe? And with this I'm going to fill with a longer stitch, about 3.5, just along the edge. The same thing on the bottom seam. Ironing up 1 centimeter. Actually ironing up 5 centimeters here, because I want to keep the length for now. Measure. Now I've cut the 2 elastics to the right length. You will also find the length of the recommended elastic on the size chart, but I attached the safety pin on one now, and I'm pushing it through the tunnel of the bias tape all the way through, trying not to get stuck. Now very careful at the end, and I'll just pin it to the bias tape, and then I'll carefully do a few stitches back and forth to attach it. Now I have pinned the elastic to the bias tape, and I'm doing a few stitches back and forth. Here I'm using a shorter stitch length, and just to make sure it's attached well. And now pulling it out on the other side, and here you can play along a little bit. I usually pull about 2 centimeters out, pin it to the bias tape, sewing it onto the bias tape. A bit tricky if you don't want to show it from the outside. And that's it. Now the dress is ready and so pretty, with the knot in the back, and of course I'm gonna try it on.